2, 3. Okay, you can see it stopped. That records. This is the Abraham Zapruder film. Beginning at frame 1, you will notice an overexposure or a different color in the film compared to the next 2 frames. In it, what we're interested in is the first scene at this point. This is called the motorcycle scene, and it runs from 001 to 132. And what we are interested in is the persons standing nearest the camera that took the film. That would be the line here. We're talking about these people along here. Also, we will later be interested in this area here, but for now we want to concentrate mainly on this couple here, and then the movement of these people who will come into view in this area. So let's begin. In the background you will see one motorcyclist already on Elm Street turning, and another 2 motorcyclists in the background going almost straight on Houston. Well, notice the color change at this point. The front motorcyclist in the rear goes straight onto Houston and then later turns on to Elm Street and catches up with the other 2 motorcycles. It should be mentioned that these motorcyclists are not the motorcyclist in front of the presidential limousine. They are in fact in front of Chief Curry's car, who is in front of the presidential limousine and is about 5 lengths in front of the limousine. So, as these motorcyclists continue to go down Elm Street, there are certain events that happen in the crowd. This is due to a certain factor. When any Kodachrome 2 film is developed, what happens is, from the laboratory itself, there is dye information in the sprocket hole. In this case, it is Kodachrome 2 and safety film and 1.37, which is the year, and also one other factor, which is the stock of film, which was 137. This will appear about every 48 frames in the film. However, what we will notice here is that I believe the film was reduced from 48 frames and taken down to about 22 frames per second. And what this does is, every time you come upon the Kodachrome 2 or the safety film or the year on the original, the film or editor has to skip over this area, because it would show up on the other film as a double Kodachrome safety film and year. So the film in its state today has only one set of dye markings, indicating that if the film was, it would be altered because the dye markings were skipped over, and thus causing a film glitch, which occurs at about every 28 frames. Other additional editing is done, however, every 28 frames you can notice what I'm talking about. So what we're going to do at this point is go up to around frame 30 and notice the two women here, their head turned, and that is a very rapid sensation. Then a head turned back. That is a first indication of a speed glitch. The next one occurs as at about frame 60, and what you will notice in particular is these two women here. And this woman here, she is next to the Stemmons Road sign. So we will continue to watch those people at present. She is, because of crowd noise at this point, she is leaning forward on to hear what this woman is saying here. This woman is significant to prove film alteration because of her clap rates, which will be seen shortly. So let's continue. Again, keep your eyes on these three people here. Notice this man here who was on the wall with Brenneman, who is here, observed the sniper on the 6th floor. This man, let's watch his movement. Let's go back. At about frame 89, he begins jumping off of the wall, and then you see him off of the wall by frame 108. Let's continue. Now, what happens here is the presidential limousine here magically appears in the view. On this film, this is also an overexposed film, which you can see. Now, what we are interested in is this area here, because Philip Willis is right here, has just ran from Houston onto Elm and is taking his 4th photo at this point. This is also Mrs. Willis, I believe, or Mrs. Stubblefield out on the street. As the two motorcyclists approach, they step back off of the curb in a very fast fashion. Also notice what I call the hat tipper, which is right here. He's tipping his hat out of respect for the president. That starts at about 141 and ends about 153. Okay, now at 154 there was a splice, and 155 and 156 are taken out of the photo. Also notice back here, this becomes very apparent in the next frame. Notice the wheel on the pavement of this car, a 64 Mercury, I believe, and then notice the wheel, and then magically something happens here at the splice. Okay, notice the splice here, which is actually 157, is the wheel is really off of the ground at that point. There is much editing. A wet splice or a splice can be done very surgically like before, but however, not only editing was done, or splicing, but editing was done to block out this area here. Now, let's continue. Okay, now what we want to do here is look at this area here. At this point here, Mrs. Stubblefield is grabbed by her husband here. She also has an umbrella she has in her hand here that swings back and forth, and she's being pulled out of the way as these motorcyclists approach. Also, Mr. Willis and his wife step back off the curb, and then famous Rosemary Willis is picked up at this point, or can be seen, and she runs from 161 to about 189, then stops. So let's continue. Let's pay attention again in this area here. We're interested in this area here, but also let's go back, and what you have here is Hugh Bexner, and he had ran around and taken a photo at 186, and he magically appears. And also let's go back to about 143, and this is kind of hard to pick up, but what you will notice in this area is him running from Houston onto Elm, and he'll be about in this location in about 5 frames. Let's see if we can pick that up. It's very difficult because of the splice. Okay, there he is. This is Hugh Bexner, and Robert Croft is about right there, and then Willis is here. And by the way, Willis, when I talked to him, there was a controversy over 27 frames of film that he had taken. Actually, he took 17 from what I gather, and this man took the other 10, and these 10 frames have never been shown to my knowledge. Let's continue. Now, although it's not the clearest, we want to go back here and watch this. We want to notice this woman here. Her hands are out in this area here, and also the shadow from her clap is here. So we'll start about 170, and you can watch the clap, the shadow better in her hands. So she claps about 5 times in that period of time, which is impossible. Also, in the background here, we see Mrs. Willis, and she is holding a handkerchief in her right hand, and it's right in this area here. Now it's very hard to see, but about 173, see the white area here is moving, and I believe it's 5 times she does that, and 1 to 190, which is an impossible feat. Let's continue. Now let's pay attention to this man up here in the background. This man here is just walking along, and then what he does, he looks down at the parade. He's just continuing his walk. Nobody, Miss Willis, Rosemary has stopped, probably because of a gunshot at that time. Also, let's go back. Notice there's no bullet hole at this point in the windshield of the presidential limousine. Let's continue, but let's go back up here, and we'll watch this man right in this area here walking, because he does quite an amazing thing. He's striding, and yet he changes his position, which is difficult in a way to find. Now notice here that this is actually the outline of a frame in the sprocket hole area. Also, what you want to pay attention to in this area here is a portion of the film shot above, and the real image is above this frame, and then a ghost image appears down in this area. The same way occurs in the sprocket hole area, which we don't have. The ghost image here appears, and then the real image is below. On this particular Zapruder film, we don't have the opportunity to observe that. Let's continue. Notice there is what they call the umbrella man. He will be pumping and turning this umbrella. Also, what we want to notice here is these two men. This is the man I call the apron man. He heard the shot about 224. Notice the president has been hit at this point. Let's go back and observe the president while we're at it again. The key thing is what happened behind the Stemmons Road sign. Up until the approach of the limousine, President Kennedy and Connally are looking over towards the grassy knoll. Kennedy is waving, and at about 200, it's kind of hard to see, he starts bringing his right arm up to his throat, or which I believe from a back shot, and Mrs. Kennedy is then looking at the president. By frame 224, Connally doesn't appear to be hit at this time. However, Kennedy's reactions are quite noticeable at this time. He has already been hit here. His arms, both arms are raised. This little portion here is a white animal, so his left leg raises up, and you can see this increases. He reacts to being shot. Now, at this point, he is all shot in the back, I believe, and also in the throat at this point. So what he has to do is he has to cough or hold his left hand over the hole in his throat to be able to take a breath. So that is what he's doing. And then Connally is struck, I believe, the first time about this time here. Notice that he is still holding on to his Stetson hat. If a bullet struck him at that point, the bullet would have broken his radial wrist, and then he would not be able to hold his hat. This is still controversial. We'll also notice right in this area a bullet hole will later appear and blood grouping around it right in this area here, and that's probably about 290. Also, this is what they call the Cuban, this man here, and he's, I believe, signaling. It could be argued that he was waving, but I believe he is signaling to the shooters that all systems go. Again, let's get back to the apron man, and notice that his hands are lowering, and he's quit clapping in reaction to shots. Now, let's continue. It should be mentioned here, this is frame 255. In the Algens photo, which reportedly corresponds to this frame, Greer is actually turned around looking directly at the president. The Algens photo has been retouched, but it is quite clear that he is doing this. Let's continue. Also, Kellerman begins to react. It should be mentioned also that throughout the trip, Kellerman, up until about 250, from 133 to 250, is looking in this rear view mirror, and he can see the president at that time, so he knows that the president has been hit at about 224 for sure. So let's continue. Okay. Again, this is frame 255, and Greer's turned around, and also Cheney should be about here in the photo and is not. He appears to be behind the limousine, but he is not seen in this frame or in the sprocket hole area. Notice Kellerman, which is Rory Kellerman here, turning around looking at the driver and also turning to his left to observe the president. Notice that this area is not particularly quite clear. However, this is important here because I believe this and this is important. This is Greer's hand here at this point on the steering wheel. And by the way, let's go back here and see one other thing. What we want to notice is in this area here, because Greer said in his testimony that he swerved the car to the right, and you can see the steering wheel, if you look closely, turning to his right, or up to the 12 o'clock position, indicating that he did swerve at that point. Let's continue. Going back here, also in a good frame, you can actually see blood spurting from the back of the president, and a better frame right in this area here. There's a spray, a mist that can be seen on a better quality film. Now, this is quite interesting. This is Charles Bain. His son is behind him at this point, and this is the babushka lady, who is almost directly behind. Notice the shadows also. And she is filming during this process. Her film was taken, and no one knows today exactly where it is. But anyway, let's watch Charles Bain at this point. He's clapping, and then his son is walking or taking 2 or 3 steps and comes out behind him at this point and is clapping, which is an impossibility. Also, what we want to notice here is from 243, Greer, which is here, his face is here, was looking at the president. I'm sorry, yeah, they turned and looked at the president. Now, at about 289, he begins to make a rapid head turn to the front. It's kind of hard to observe, but we'll go up here for 5 frames. You can see that rapid head turn there. So he, in 5 frames, is completely turned from about 165 degrees from the rear to the front. That was his first turn that we can see in the film. Also notice, this is Jean Hill, the woman in red. This is Mary Mormon. She's getting ready to take a photograph shortly at this time. She has a Polaroid and could have taken a photo at any time, but had waited for some reason to take her famous 5th photo. This in the background here is Tony Foster. Now at this point, Greer is facing the front, and so is Kellerman. Now they have already been to the front. Now this is interesting. Although it is difficult to see, or almost impossible in a good frame, you can actually see a ballistic trail or going through the president's skull and out in this area. Now, What's interesting about that is that the ballistic trail is not the bullet. It is a redaction trail caused by a bullet passing through a person and causing rarefied air, which is heated up. And because of that, Kodachrome 2 has silver halide in the film, and it can capture subatomic particles and also bullet trails if the temperature is 68 degrees. Now, that morning the temperature was about 37 degrees. It had rained, and the Hertz sign showed that the temperature was 68 degrees at the time of this shooting. This was on Willis's 12th photo. So we know that the president by this time has been shot in the back, shot in the throat, or a fragment hit him in the throat. Then a headshot from the rear struck him here and transited through about right here in his head. Governor Connally at this point, let's go back, I believe Governor Connally is shot from another bullet, actually a 224, just for the record. I believe Connally is also shot, and this bullet enters his left shoulder and transfers quite down into his coat. And actually, on examining the coat, you can see the bullet transiting through that. I believe that bullet in itself just transited and then went into the floorboard. I believe Connally was hit again about at this point here. Okay, from at this point here, I believe Connally is shot in the wrist. Now, not at this point, but right here, and then the bullet from the knoll goes into the cushion of this seat here, which can later be seen in Commission Exhibit 353. It's difficult to see that at this point. Also, this is not the Thorborn position. This is, in other words, caused by a spinal injury. This is caused by Kennedy being struck and hit in the throat and having to reach and put his hand over the bullet hole in his throat to breathe. Also notice that he has a knee-jerk, what they call a knee-jerk reaction, and this white animal that they had in the car is on his left leg, and notice that it raises up as we continue, and then it falls from view. Now, Jean Hill had seen this, and in her testimony, which she appears at this point, however, she was about, I would say, 30 feet from that, but noticing the president at about 30 feet, she could see this action. In her testimony, nobody believed that. I had talked to Jean Hill and gave her a photo of the dog or stuffed animal or corsage in Commission Exhibit 353 and 352, which showed the white object in the car after the assassination in the presidential limousine in the White House garage, prior to the limousine being cleaned up, dismantled, and then flown to Hessen-Eisenhardt for complete reverberation. Let's continue. Again, notice Greer. He is turned around at this point looking at the president. Kellerman is looking straight ahead, or appears to be doing so. What Kellerman is doing is not quite clear. Also, we want to look at this here. This is stream 312. Now, what's interesting about that is Greer, it appears, has no weapon in his hand. I believe this was edited out at this point. And probably if we go back to about this area here, editing starts, you can see this jerk here in frame 302 to 303. There's something here. It could be his left arm coming around to shoot the president. By the way, he had on a short sleeve shirt, and this would be his hand at this point. It's quite obscure and hard to see. That's just a possibility. Another possibility is at 313 a shot came from the front and struck the president in this area about here, or the other theory is that he was struck again in the rear. I'll let you be the judge on that. Now let's continue. Okay, now 313 we see a massive head blast. This here could be a tumbling bullet. That's possible. This could be a composite, which I believe. And this object here has never been explained to exactly what it is. It changes. It starts at 313 and goes to about 334. The thing about this is that if you notice, after 319 we have no reference point to where the limousine is exactly. If we have a panoramic view of the complete plaza or above the area that Zapruder filmed, notice the darkness in this area. This is quite unusual. It should be much clearer, but it is not. Also, notice here there's something going on at this point here that still needs further investigation. And also, and notice here, and this is frame 322, that the glare off of Greer's pistol is seen at this point. I believe that to be the pistol and this to be the glare. And then Hugh Bexner said in an affidavit that he noticed Greer with a chrome revolver in his hand. Now, whether he shot the president, I'm not going to say. It's not in the film. I believe the reason they edited the film was to take out what occurred with the two front persons in the front seat and to hide what the movements are of of Connolly and Kennedy being shot. Notice the object moving. It moves along a almost straight path and then disappears. Now, the people in the background here, this person here is Charles Bopham, which you can barely see. The running man is what they call the SOB. He was carrying a sign, had SOB on it. You have a camera case which belongs to James Algens. Algens is here at this point. It appears that his camera is ready to take a picture, but whether he did during this period of time is unclear. He may have taken a photo and then it never showed up in the official record. That has never been questioned. Notice here, this is quite convincing in showing film alteration. In Life magazine on May 29th, and in the black and white issue, they showed this movement. Here they showed two frames, but let's go back here. They showed this frame here. I'm sorry, right here. That was frame 347. And then the next frame that they had shown was at about 355. And notice the movement that he had done in that period of time, an impossibility. Also notice this orange stripe here, which I believe to be kind of the end of the kill zone. This was painted probably for the assassins. There were two stripes, or possibly three, along the curb, and that has never been explained. Also notice here, Connolly has finally has showed that a bullet entered from blood grouping in his back at this point, and then there's considerable movement in this car at this point. Now, in my film, in my 8mm film, when I first got it, let's go back. Okay, in my 8mm film, at this point here, a piece of Kennedy's skull fragment is seen going across here from 323 to 327. That is no longer seen in the film. This might be, perhaps you can see this here. There's something here that could be it, but in mine it was quite clear. I don't think that was what that was. Also, let's go back to the next shot. Now we're going back to the next shot after the head shot, and what we're seeing here is a bullet coming in from the rear, striking the chrome strip here. And what we'll see is a glare, which we see here. And what that had done, it didn't hit the chrome strip directly. It hit the rod which was holding the sun visor on Kellerman's side, and then it pushed the rod into the attachment which held up the rear view mirror. The rear view mirror was the mirror I'm talking about, is here. The stem then pushed into the windshield and broke the stem away from the presidential limousine. This was seen in later White House photos. I just wanted to bring that out at this point. Let's continue. Again, this is Botham, Algens, right there, and then Summers falling to the ground, and then we see something quite amazing. This is the Franzens, and what we have here is their son Jeff, and we see three people. We see Mr. Franzen holding his hand on the back of Jeff's head. Also notice the shadows, and then we see Mrs. Franzen approaching from the rear. Is what they called a gin man, or I call him a beverage man, but he was later named gin man. The reason he's holding a cup or something in his hand as the presidential limousine goes by, it should be noticed that at this point the people in the background aren't really looking at what's going on. They're in the background, but they don't appear to be watching the event as it occurs in real time of the president being shot. Okay, at this point Jacqueline is going back on the hood of the car. Notice that in this here, her legs are still in the car in the rear seat, and she at this time reaches out about as far as she can. Also, this couple here in the background in the Zapruder film, let's look at this and then go back to Jacqueline. In the next film, these people were about 30 feet apart or more, but in this particular film, they are what appears to be about 13 feet. So that suggests severe deletions of frames from the Zapruder film. Now let's go back to Jackie again. Jackie is horrified by this point and is just trying, I believe, to get out of the car. I did see a fragment go over, and let's do one other thing. Let's go back again. And there was one other significant thing here that occurred. Okay, at this point here, a skull fragment can be seen falling here, in this frame here, down And if you take the very next frame, you can actually see the skull fragment as it falls into the rear seat of the presidential limousine. Let's go on to the next frame. And then you could see that at this point here. I'm not going to deal with the head blast, another thing. I'm just pointing out that. And there we go again. I see what I did. And then the beverage man is here. Notice there's quite a bit of ruffling of the flowers given to Mrs. Conley at this point. And also this is what I consider the beginning of the kill zone here, where the end of the kill zone is about right here where this yellow painting was done to the curb. Now let's continue. There's the Franzen. And notice here, again, and this is frame 374, notice the beverage man here and this couple here. They're about 30 feet apart, and yet they appear to be within about 13 feet of each other. Now, let's get back to Mrs. Kennedy. In the Orville Nix film, she is seen going out on the trunk of the car, and what's interesting is in the Nix film she appears to be on the trunk much longer than in the Zapruder film. Now let's pay our attention here to Hill. Hill was in the Muchmore film is quite interesting. At about 260, Hill goes off of the running board of the Queen Mary. The presidential limousine is only about 3 to 4 feet from the front fender of the Queen Mary at that time. The presidential limousine begins to accelerate probably at about 320 on the film, and then the Queen Mary swerves also to the right and hits Hill, which causes Hill to fall onto the fender. He braces himself with his right hand, and in the process pushes himself off the fender, and then regains his balance to a certain point and takes 3 steps. And then from 3 steps he gets onto the running board, and he has a grip. He uses the grip, however it's unsuccessful. And then he falls back to the ground, both feet, and then he has to run another 5 feet, or 5 steps I should say, and then he gets his left leg finally secure on the running board and the hand grip, and then his right leg slips once more, and then he uses his right leg when it hits the ground as leverage, and he pushes up, and then he has a grasp on the back of the limousine, which occurs at this point. So from about 360 to 390 or 30 frames, he does all that impossible movement. I just wanted to bring that up. Now this gets quite interesting here. There appears to be some problems with the editing. Notice the angle of the cars, and this bush in front of along the wall. The wall's, by the way, 40 feet long, and the Zapruder's camera is on the far side of the wall, and this bush here is probably 6 or 7 feet from the camera lens. So what's interesting at this point is, again, we want to see the difference in the angles here, and notice this movement here, how the movement moves down here, and then the movement goes across, which is impossible in one frame. Also notice the cars changing position. Let's do that again. Just start again and try it once more. Notice this bush and brush in front of the camera lens, the direction going in this way. In the very next frame, it goes in this direction also. I want to go back to one thing here. And what's interesting here is that the presidential, this is just an example, the presidential limousine is very clear in this area. The background people are very blurred. And the next frame, however, or next 3 frames, then they become very clear and the presidential limousine becomes blurred. This is needs investigation. This appears throughout the film. That's just an example. Now let's get back to this issue here. Now, in this here, you have the foliage, and then behind this telephone pole, notice the pole is full. It's a full telephone pole, and the pole in the background here. Now I believe this to be Stimulus, who is taking a photograph or filming using a camera of the presidential limousine. At this point, his film was confiscated. Now let's just watch his movement. Remember, this is only about 3 frames. He completely turns around and is running towards the rear and covering a considerable area. Oh, I'd say about 6 or 7 feet in that time frame. Also, we want to see one other thing at this point. Now, at this point here, this is the man who was shot on the cheek. He has his car door open and evidently has been shot at this point and is facing the other direction. Then, if you look at this area here, the vehicles and things change. But this particular person who was hit in the cheek, I believe his name was Charles Brame, has turned around. So he is already hit at that point. So let's continue. Let's go back here. I want to do one other thing. Look at this pole change. Let's see if we can see it. Now this is frame 411, and only in this frame we have something very strange. Notice the thickness of the pole to the grass area, and then it becomes very thin on the top. I find that very unusual. This man here is also running, but he's doing unusual movements like Charles Stimulus. This man was never identified. I'll just kind of go over what he's doing. He's got very strange movements. That's the clearest movement. And then this is frame 416, and there's Charles Brame, like I said, turned. He's already struck and is turned, not facing the presidential motorcade at that time. Now, as we go to the underpass, in the sprocket hole area, there's a considerable amount of things to be covered, but in this only viewing area, not much can be discerned. So, basically, this is the Zapruder film as we know it. It should be mentioned that Hill never successfully got into the car at this point. He is on the Continental wheel cover, or does get on there, and straddles that, at least till they get under the overpass. You can see that in the sprocket hole area. This is probably the clearest frame that shows that action, and that's at 458. So this is the end of the Zapruder film, and I just wanted to bring out that what occurs in the film is this. Because the film, let's first begin. When the film first went to Kodak and developed, it takes about 2 hours to develop. The film was uncropped at that point, or not split, I should say. It was then taken to Jameson Lab, and 3 copies were made at that time. They were contact prints. Again, getting back to the original could not be changed in any form because if any light struck the images recorded on the film would become useless because of it being overexposed. So we know at that point, when the film was at Kodak, the film was not altered, if it was altered. The evidence here presented shows evidence of film alteration. The key thing is that about every 28 frames, in other words, that being that the camera ran at 48 and reduced to 23 frames per second, a speed glitch would occur. Also, there's additional editing when need be. So we have that combination, but on the whole, when what we will call the so-called original was made, all the dye markings from the original had to be removed from the original, because after the film or so-called original was edited and put together, the dye markings would appear. Now, the dye markings again are set at the factory, in this case Kodak in New York, and until development no one knows where they appear. So this is a problem, but once the film is developed, we can see exactly where the frames are, where the dye markings are, and they can just be skipped over, and that's what causes a speed glitch. Hopefully this information will help explain some of the areas that is currently being dealt with by Livingston, David Lifton, and Dr. Mantic. So with this I'll close, and hopefully this will help in determining or make a clearer picture of what has occurred and can be proven by the speed glitches and quick movements observed in this small analysis. Thank you very much.